Have you ever looked at a question mark, really looked at it, and noticed how strange it is as a symbol? It has two completely separate parts that bear no obvious relationship to each other. A curved hook at the top, like a compressed wave, or the beginning of a spiral that changed its mind. And beneath it, separated by a gap, a full stop that seems to have arrived from a different system entirely. Nothing about it suggests a question. Nothing about it looks like the natural shape of uncertainty or inquiry. Compared to the full stop, the comma, the colon, all of which have clear visual logic as pauses or separations of varying weight, the question mark looks arbitrary, almost decorative. You have been reading and writing it your entire life and have almost certainly never asked what it is or where it came from, which is, considering the subject matter, a slightly ironic omission. Every written language that uses the Latin alphabet shares this symbol. Spanish uses it twice, once inverted at the start of the sentence and once right side up at the end, but the glyph itself is identical. Arabic, Greek, Armenian, and several other writing systems have their own interrogative marks, some semicolons, some inverted commas, each one evolved from its own tradition. But the curved hook over a dot that appears at the end of this sentence is specifically Latin in its origins, and its shape is not arbitrary at all. It is a compressed word, a ligature that collapsed across several centuries of manuscript copying into something so condensed that the original letters became unrecognizable. But here's the surprising truth. The question mark is not a symbol invented to represent questioning. It is the word question, written in Latin, abbreviated by monks who were copying long texts by hand, compressed by scribal convention over generations into a form nobody intended to create and nobody could have predicted from the starting point. Today, we're tracing how a single Latin word turned into one of the most universally recognized symbols in written communication, why it took centuries longer than you might expect for punctuation to be standardized at all, and what the history of the question mark reveals about how written language actually evolves. To understand this, you have to begin not with punctuation, but with the physical conditions of writing in the early medieval period. Manuscripts were copied by hand, slowly, by scribes in monasteries who might spend years producing a single large text. Parchment was expensive, prepared from animal skin, and available in limited quantities. Ink had to be mixed carefully. The time investment in a single manuscript was enormous, measured in months or years of labor. In that environment, abbreviation was not a stylistic choice. It was a practical necessity. Common words and phrases were routinely compressed to save space and time. A scribe copying a theological text who encountered the word quaestio, the Latin for question or inquiry, hundreds of times over the course of a manuscript, had every incentive to develop a shorthand. The abbreviation that emerged, used in Carolingian manuscripts from around the 9th century onward, placed the letter Q above the letter O, one stacked on top of the other, as a compact representation of quaestio. It was a space-saving convention within a world where every abbreviation was understood by other trained scribes who shared the same education and the same manuscripts. The stacked letters were not intended to become a symbol. They were a professional shorthand between people who knew exactly what they stood for. Think of it like a doctor's prescription notation. The symbols and abbreviations on a prescription are not a new language invented for the purpose. They are compressed Latin and Greek terms, meaningful to anyone trained to read them, opaque to everyone else, maintained across centuries less because they are the best possible notation and more because the community that uses them has no incentive to change a system that already works among its members. The scribe writing QO Above a passage was communicating with future readers who shared the same training, not designing a symbol for public use. What happened over the following centuries was not a decision, but a drift. As manuscript production expanded and copying became more widespread, the stacked q began to evolve under the pressure of rapid writing. The loop of the lowercase q, repeated thousands of times across thousands of manuscripts by scribes working quickly, began to lose its precise circular form and elongate slightly. The tail of the q, which curves beneath the bowl of the letter, began to be written with more emphasis than the bowl itself, which shrank. The o beneath it, written quickly, flattened toward a dot. By the 13th and 14th centuries, the stacked abbreviation had developed into something that looked less like two letters and more like a single composite glyph, a curved descending stroke above a point. The original letters were still present, technically, but the connection between the visible symbol and its Latin etymology had become invisible to anyone who had not traced the genealogy. So if the symbol evolved gradually through copying drift, why did it take until the 15th century for the question mark to appear in anything like its modern standardized form? The answer, as is often the case in history, comes down to what printing changed rather than what it created. When Johannes Gutenberg's printing press began producing books in commercial quantities in the 1450s, it introduced something manuscript culture had never had: identical copies. Every copy of a manuscript was unique, the product of a specific scribe's hand and habits. Abbreviations varied between scriptoria, between regions, between individual monks. There was no single authoritative form of the stacked quaestio abbreviation, only a family of similar marks that competent readers recognized as belonging to the same tradition. Printing required type. Type required decisions. A symbol had to be cast as a specific physical piece of metal with a specific shape, to be used consistently across every copy of every book a press produced. The question mark as a fixed glyph, with its characteristic curve and dot cast in metal type, was a product of the necessity to choose one form from the range of variations that manuscript culture had generated. Early printers across Europe made different choices, and the question mark was not immediately universal. Some early printed books used a semicolon or an inverted semicolon to mark interrogative sentences. Others used the evolving quaestio symbol. The form that eventually standardized across European printing was the one that had already traveled furthest from its letter origins, the curved hook over a dot that most resembled neither Q nor O, but had developed through centuries of copying into its own distinct and recognizable shape. So, the next time you type a question mark without thinking about it, you'll know what you're placing at the end of your sentence. Not a symbol designed for the purpose, not a deliberate invention by any single person. A Latin word, written by a monk in a hurry, copied 10,000 times by scribes who were each making slightly different versions of what they saw in front of them, condensed by accumulated variation into something nobody planned and nobody could reverse, and then frozen into metal type by a printing industry that needed to pick a shape and commit to it. The question mark is a word that forgot it was a word. It has been asking what it is ever since.